we need to have a way to find out whether the user is already signed in or not, and also to get the user's ID. We're going to get this data from FirebaseAuth and, of course, hide any mention of Firebase inside the domain layer. Hello, welcome to Reso Coder, where you are getting prepared for real app development so that you will get freelance clients or a job and be confident about the apps you build. So subscribe and hit the bell to join us on our quest for becoming in-demand Flutter developers. In the previous part, we have built this kind of a form for signing in, so we can enter some invalid value. Sign in, we cannot sign in because it's invalid, but when I enter a valid sort of an email, everything is now good. The same goes for password. It needs to be at least 6 characters long, and we can also sign in with Google like this. All right, so I sign in here, and yeah, this is what happens. Nothing happens actually. We are not taken anywhere, and what's worse, even after I hot restart the app, we are not going to be taken anywhere else than to the sign-in screen again, which has been of course cleared up, because we have no mechanism of finding out whether the user has already signed in previously. And of course we can utilize FirebaseAuth automatic persisting of the access token behind the scenes. We don't need to worry about that, but we can basically find out if the user has already been signed in. How are we going to accomplish all of this? Well, we are going to, of course, hop into FirebaseAuth Facade, Infrastructure Auth, layer and feature. And over here is where we operate with FirebaseAuth. If we were not separating our app into layers and basically protecting ourselves from overly influencing our code by Firebase, we basically want to hide the fact that we are using Firebase in the infrastructure layer. If we were not doing anything like that, we could say something like, of course, create a new method and say something like FirebaseAuth. So this instance of it dot current user, right? And this returns a feature of Firebase user. Okay, cool. So we could say like then value, and this is a Firebase user, and this contains email, display name. This contains also the user ID, which we are gonna be able to use to uniquely specify a document inside the Firestore database for each and every user of our app. And we would be just able to use something like this. And of course, if current user returns null, as it writes here, this means that there is no user currently signed in. And sure, we could do it uncleanly like this, just utilize the Firebase user type directly. But of course, as you may already anticipate, because we are doing this thing cleanly and we definitely don't want Firebase to be present inside all of our layers, we are going to create Firebase independent user type. This way, even if we in the future decide that we don't want to use Firebase for authentication, but we want to do some custom solution, we will not need to touch any other layer of our app except for the infrastructure layer, because again, we are going to limit the influence of Firebase to the infrastructure layer, and that's totally awesome. So how and where are we going to create the independent user type in this app? Well, we are going to create it under the domain layer, of course, because domain holds everything which is independent of anything else inside this app, and the concept of a user should really be independent of any other layer. So let's create a new file, user.dart. And now this is not going to be a value object which is being validated constantly. Like for example, we have the email address and password, which are value objects. No, user is going to be an entity instead. The difference between a value object and an entity is that basically entities are comprised of, or can be comprised of, multiple value objects. Entities such as user, are not going to be validated by themselves. Instead, the value objects which are held inside of them, like for example, user can be comprised of an email address and let's say first name. These value objects are going to be validated on their own. All right, so now that we sort of understand the concept of an entity, what is going to be held inside the user entity? Well, we definitely want to hold a unique ID here because unique identifier is needed for every user so that we can actually assign a certain Firestore document to each and every unique user of our app, where that user's notes are going to be stored, because definitely you want to have user-specific notes. And you may be thinking that, hey Matt, but storing a unique ID for Firestore, is that not breaching the contract of the domain layer where it says that it should be independent of Firebase, Firestore, or Postgres, or whatever you're doing in whatever app you are building? Well, no, we are not breaching the contract, because unique ID, just as it can be assigned for Firestore documents and collections, it can also be assigned for SQLite rows, it can be assigned for Hive objects, it can be assigned for shared preferences keys, and basically for anything. So the distinction is that sure, we can use unique ID for any sort of a specific solution for storing user data, but the unique ID in itself is not bound to any particular storage solution. So this makes it domain layer worthy and infrastructure layer independent. All right, cool. So now we know that we should store unique ID. How are we going to create this user type? Well, it's going to be a freezed data class. So let's use the snippets here. Of course, I messed it up. So data class, it's going to be called user. All right, now import freezed. And we're going to do ptf, so freezed part statement. And we can actually immediately run our command. Hopefully I'm not gonna forget to also provide it down in the description of this video, and also be sure to check out the project on GitHub from the link in the video description. And once it's been generated, let's think about how are we going to represent the unique ID. I have said that entities such as this user are going to be comprised of possibly multiple value objects. In the case of our user, it's enough for us to store the unique ID because we are really not interested in knowing the user's email address when we are running the app. We could be interested in that, but we are not. We really don't care in our particular note-taking app. So unique ID can be represented by a string, right? String ID. Let's make it required. And this is fine, but how can we guarantee the uniqueness of this string? Currently, we have just no way of guaranteeing that it's going to be unique. And you probably know what we are about to do next. Of course, we are going to create a unique ID value object. Let's do so inside core value objects, because really this unique ID value object is totally feature independent. Just like a user can have unique ID, also the nodes which the user is going to take are going to have a unique ID. So let's go and let's create the unique ID value object. So I'm going to use my snippet VOBJ. You can use it too if you have already added it to your VS Code, or you can also just get the code from the link in the video description, which is already finished. Let's call it unique ID. Its health type will be string. And now this is going to be a bit of a special value object because unlike with email and password, which are just being validated here, if I show you here, email address inside the factory, it's being validated by the function, and the same goes for password. So the special thing about the unique ID is that we are not actually gonna validate it inside factory, and by default it's not going to receive any kind of an input. Remember that we want to guarantee uniqueness of an ID. What we need to do is to generate a unique ID right here for whenever we are going to be creating unique IDs inside our app. This applies, for example, to the nodes. Nodes are going to be created locally, and we want to make sure that they have unique IDs also on Firestore database. However, in the case of a user, the situation is completely different. We are not going to be generating unique IDs inside our app. Instead, we can obtain the unique IDs directly from FirebaseAuth by this UID call, which provides the user ID for the signed in user. So this means that the other case, which we need to handle inside our unique ID value object, is for when we already have a unique ID presented to us. So this is going to be implemented in just a bit. But for now, let's focus on a second factory of our unique ID value object, which is going to be actually a named factory from unique string, and it's going to accept string unique ID. In this case, we are going to need to trust that the provided string is in fact unique. We are not going to be able to validate it for obvious reasons because it's basically impossible. But because of the fact that we have specified a separate factory constructor, which is called from unique string, we are just going to have to trust our future self or our coworkers that they are not going to mess this up, and they are just not going to provide something like ABC to this constructor. So how are we going to implement it? Well, it's going to be simple. Just assert that unique ID doesn't equal null. And if it doesn't, well, then we are just going to say write, because it's valid, and unique ID. All right, so now the value held inside this value object will be write unique ID. And for some reason we have an error here. That's because the value failure should have the string type. So this is what we are gonna do when we already have an ID provided to us. But what's gonna happen when we are just creating the ID inside of our app, for example, when we are gonna be creating new nodes with unique ID? Well, then we want to do something completely different. We want to utilize a package called UUID. So let's go over to pubspec YAML. We're going to say add dependency using pubspec assist extension. UUID is gonna be its name. I think this is the one. Hopefully, once we save pubspec YAML and come back to the file, we're now going to say write, because we can always trust that the UUID package is going to generate a unique ID. And let's just say UUID, and we're gonna say version 1. So this way we have created two ways to construct a unique ID. One of them is truly unique, and the other one, well, we're just going to have to trust that the string which is passed in is truly unique, and there is really nothing we can do about that. Now we can come back to user, and instead of string ID, we can make it hold unique ID. And I'm gonna have to rerun the build command. With this user type already implemented, we can move on to implementing and also providing the interface for FirebaseAuth Facade. Because I have shown you how to get the current user from FirebaseAuth, but of course we need to have some methods which are going to facilitate this to other layers of our app. So let me just quickly delete this mess which I have created inside FirebaseAuth Facade, and let's first jump into the interface for the Auth Facade, Auth Facade, which is present inside the domain layer, and we are going to create new methods inside of it, which are going to be for getting the currently signed in user and also for signing out. So we are going to add one method, which is going to return a future option. User will be held inside of it, which is our domain user type. It's gonna be called getSignedInUser. You've already seen the option type. It's basically something like a non-nullable type, which can either hold none or some user. And then the last method, which is going to be present inside Auth Facade, is going to be future void sign out. We're going to implement it right now because it's very easy to implement. So for the sake of not getting back to Auth Facade in the next episodes, let's just get it completed right now. So now we have this interface updated. Let's go ahead and implement these methods. So we're going to go into infrastructure, FirebaseAuth Facade, and we immediately can see that we are missing something very important, and that something important are those two methods which we have just added. So getSignedInUser, what is it going to do after we import everything properly? Actually, this can be an expression bodied method, and over here we want to do just what I have shown you a while ago. So we are going to access FirebaseAuth current user. This returns a future containing Firebase user. So we say then, so that we don't have to introduce any await keywords here. The value inside the future is Firebase user, so let's make it named nicely so that we know what's going on. And what do we want to do with this Firebase user? Well, we want to sort of convert it to option user. And how are we going to do that? Firebase user is of course of type Firebase user, which we do not own. Firebase user type comes from the FirebaseAuth library. And basically what we now want to do is to get hold of the Firebase user's UID, which is the user ID, pass it over to the user type like this, specify that this is for the ID, should be doable, and now sort of return it as an option, which is going to be some when Firebase user is not null, and it's going to be none when Firebase user is null. Of course, this needs to be wrapped inside unique ID. Let's import this dot from unique string and all of this, and it's already getting totally crazily nested and horrible. We cannot know what's going on. So how can we make this work nicely? Well, the answer is that we should add a method for converting this infrastructure Firebase user, which is specific to Firebase, to our nicely separated domain representation of a user. And this conversion method for converting between these two types should be present on the infrastructure type. So in this case, Firebase user. Basically, let's discard all of this mess. And what we want to be able to do instead is just to call Firebase user dot to domain like this. Of course, Firebase user can be null, So we want to use the safe access operator. And now we're just going to say option off, which you are already familiar with from previous parts. Basically, if whatever is passed into option off is null, it's going to return none. If the value passed in is not null, it's going to return some. And with code looking like this, we are going to be basically good to go. The problem is that there is no toDomain method present inside Firebase user class. But the good news is that since extension members were added, we can now create an extension method called toDomain. So let's do just that. We're going to create it under infrastructure auth feature, new file, Firebase user mapper. This old name actually stems from the fact that previously you would need to create a class, Firebase user mapper, with a static method returning the user, which would accept Firebase user, and it would be a mess, you know, static methods, nobody likes them. But now we can create an extension instead. So let's get rid of all of this. We're going to create an extension, Firebase user domain X. And it's going to be an extension on Firebase user. Let's import all of the types, which we cannot do because for some reason we have old version of Dart running. So let's go here to pubspec YAML. Of course, let's say 2.8.0 because we are now running on Flutter 1.17, which has been released just a few days ago. And all right, interesting. One restart of Visual Studio Code later, now we are able to use extensions. So just keep in mind that restarting is almost always the best possible solutions to all of your problems in life. We can now define our so much desperately needed extension method, which is going to return the domain user type toDomain, and we're going to return user, which is going to hold an ID from unique ID, from unique string, and pass in user UID. So this UID, but because we are cool, we don't need no this prefix, we can delete it, and we're just going to specify UID. Just so you know where this UID is coming from, it's coming from this object of Firebase user. With this setup, we can now go over to FirebaseAuth Facade. We would want to import this toDomain extension. Sadly, this is totally not possible because of undisclosed reasons. So we need to import it ourselves, something like imports ./Firebase user mapper should work just fine. And now, as you can see, we can now use our toDomain extension. So this is the first method which we ought to have implemented. Now let's jump to the easier method, which is sign out, because that's also present inside the interface now. So all the way down below all of the sign in and sign up methods, we're going to create sign out. And this one will be totally easy to implement. We just want to sign out of Google sign in, sign out, and also out of FirebaseAuth, sign out. These both return futures, so we can await both of them. And this would be enough, but because I want to show you a cool trick here, we are going to do it a bit differently. Whenever you want to await multiple futures, you can also do something like return future.await and specify a list of futures. So for example, of methods which return futures. So this is a list. We need to just separate it by a comma, not semicolon. Okay, like this. And because this wait returns a future itself, we don't need this async keyword here because we are not awaiting anything. And we can actually also make it into a expression body method. So now you know that you are the best programmer when you can write code like this. So we have just implemented a very important functionality in a completely Firebase independent way. That is that we can now obtain the current user and also therefore find out if someone is already signed in or not. This will allow us to present a user either the sign-in screen when the user launches the app for the first time, for example, or take the user directly to view the notes. We're gonna navigate based on the sign-in status in the next part, so be sure to subscribe to this channel and also join Notification Squad by hitting the bell button to make sure you don't miss the next part and also to grow your Flutter skills, because here on ResoCoder, I am determined to provide you with the best tutorials and resources so that you will become an in-demand Flutter developer. Also, you can find the code written in this episode from the link in the video description. And if you are serious about becoming a great Flutter developer who can build real apps for clients or at a job, go to flutter.education. Link is also in the video description to get the top curated Flutter news and resources aimed at improving your app development career. Over there, you can also subscribe to my mailing list to get the best Flutter resources delivered weekly right into your inbox. So, if this video helped you, give it a like and also share it with other developers who are going to benefit from this knowledge too. Leave a comment if you have anything to say, and see you in the next video.